Okay. And right on time, Kaya is joining us. Wonderful. All right. I believe we are live in every sense. We are. Hello, everybody. Climate Solutions Caucus. And it is Thursday, January 27th. And we have a special guest today, which is a fun change, but special but familiar guest, I would say. Former Representative Kaya Morris is going to talk to us about the equity screen and work that she participated in both as a member of the Climate Council and then as an advisor to. And this is going to inform some of our work and of course comes with the recommendation of the Climate Action Plan. But just before we turn it over to Kaya, let me tell you that Sarah, Representative Copeland-Hansis, is in a meeting with leadership and will be joining us shortly. And we also have, as part of our summer and fall, one of our working groups led by Representative Kornheiser and Representative Colburn, we're looking particularly at social equity and just transition. So I want to turn it over to them just to kind of set the table and then introduce Kaya. So Emily and Selena, I'm going to turn it over to you and hope that you'll help us understand our program today.
Thanks, Chris. I think you stole a little bit of our rehearsed thunder here, but as folks may remember, that when the Climate Caucus met this summer to think about our work for this upcoming year and how it would fit into the work of the climate panel, and with the Global Warming Solutions Act and the Climate Action Plan, we decided to, in some ways, reorganize our Climate Caucus to align with the subcommittees of the Climate Council. And so we created a Just Transition Working Group within the Climate Caucus. And so Representative Colburn and I are the co-chairs of it. We have a few more members who have been joining us, and we've been meeting every few weeks to talk through what is the best strategy to ensure that the activities that we undertake, the legislation that we pick up, and how we conduct ourselves with regards to climate action legislation is in line with both the policy goals and the sort of methodology, strategy, inclusion, conversation, and really incredible work that happened and began at the Climate Council with regards to the Climate Action Plan. And so we're really feel that our first step in all of that is to really learn as a caucus how to think about these things holistically, how to think about these things strategically, how to think about what a just transition means for each of our work in each of our committees. And so Representative Colburn will add some more on that.
Yes, I don't have much more to add. I think we really wanted to uplift and learn about, and we invited Kaya here to join us to talk in more detail about the kind of equity screening, guiding principles for a just transition that the Climate Council's Just Transitions Committee developed and was adopted by the full council as a tool in their work, but potentially a tool in ours as well. I'll just say I dropped a couple things in the chat. One of the other strong recommendations of our group is that the Climate Council really consider an environmental justice bill a priority legislation for us this year. And I dropped a link to S-148, which is Senator Hinsdale's environmental justice bill that's seeing some movement in the Senate. There is, I understand, a companion bill in the House that folks, in particular in the Social Equity Caucus, did some work developing and introducing. So those were really the two strong recommendations of our working group. And I'm really pleased and excited and very grateful to be able to turn things over to Caius to tell us a lot more about their work and really help us get a little more in-depth understanding of this tool and some thoughts of maybe about how we might be able to use it in our work. Thank you, Kaya, so much. And in addition to being a former representative. Kaya is also the movement politics director at Rights and Democracy, which has their own extensive platform on climate action that's part of a regional approach. Thanks, Kaya.
Hello all, good morning or afternoon. It's been a continuous day. It's been a continuous couple of years. So glad to see you all, and happy to be able to share information, perspectives, and ways to think about this work. So truly grateful to be able to be here again, recognizing that this is going to be long range work. So while the Global Warming Solutions Act came fast and furious, the work that comes from there is going to be long range. It is going to have to be continually dynamic and responsive to a number of different opportunities and challenges that are going to be coming forth as we're trying to do it and do it right. What I can tell you is that the work that has happened, as mentioned, I was previously a member of the Climate Council, not as a counselor, but as the co-chair of the Just Transition Subcommittee, and served within that capacity while this document itself was being drafted, that was sent to you earlier this morning, that goes through the guiding principles for a just transition and also includes an assessment tool that the Climate Council used in trying to develop an equity analysis for the proposals that went forth. As I'm sure you've heard 20,000 times, but I'm going to say it once more, the number one biggest challenge in all of this had everything to do with the timing of both trying to create this climate action plan at a much more truncated pace than any other state has attempted to do it, as well as the challenges that it brought around direct community engagement. So even within the best efforts that we tried to create of asking this essentially volunteer workforce to put in, sometimes people were putting in 40 hours a week on top of their regular jobs. And that's not even an exaggeration, as they would go through and catalog the time that they put into this. But what that meant is that the community engagement components were not able to speak back to that work, and they did not walk out feeling as though they were able to co-create this. That this was not something that was people driven, and that sometimes the best ideas are still undiscovered because of the fact that that community engagement was just not there. So we are trying to work very diligently, and state government is trying to work very diligently to sort of backfill as much as they can this work, and that is going to be something that you will want to keep in mind. Now, I do also recognize that it's not unusual for the state to suddenly be like, okay, we're all doing results-based accountability. Anybody remember that? Yeah, remember? So it was required that we do a results-based accountability assessment on everything we do. And on occasions, we've had one that have talked about you must use a racial justice lens, or just different kind of sprinklings of hey, can we think deeper about what this means and what the impacts might be, right? And we have struggled with that. So, but this is this is different because it is everyone. This impacts all who live and work within Vermont. It impacts the lived environment, it impacts our economy, and it impacts our future. So it's going to require that we actually do go a little bit deeper when it comes to thinking about the proposals that you're going to be seeing and voting on in the next weeks, years, months to come. So what I've been asked to do today is to kind of take you through a presentation that talks about the just transition principles themselves and how we use the equity screening tool. And I'm happy to answer questions around this. So this, I will say, is it's obviously not mandatory that you all utilize the screening tool. This could be a component of what comes out of the EJ bill and what that particular board chooses to say as a way that they can help evaluate some of the different proposals that they'll be reviewing. It will require that you're going to probably have to reach out to some of your community organizations and those who have a vested interest in this work to help support you in filling in the gaps for the information that the Climate Action Plan cannot speak to. So just to be completely 100 about what you all have in front of you. So I have a PowerPoint presentation that I will take folks through. I will let you know that as I go through the PowerPoint, I'm not always keeping track of the chat. So as much as I know people will want to communicate through the chat, it's challenging for me, and as well as for others that are trying to follow, to actually really understand what's happening here. And I don't want to miss your good thoughts, and I do want to make sure that they're brought into the conversation. So I will ask that, unless you're like, hey, can somebody help fix my microphone, that we limit how much we use the chat as part of this conversation. Unless it's throws, if you want to snap or emojis, I'm good with that. So all right, let's go ahead and get into this presentation. So I'm going to switch over to sharing screen so that you can see my PowerPoint. Again, I may not be able to see your faces, and I may not be able to see the chat. So if there is something urgent, you can unmute. There's comfort in this to do that in this space.
Let me just jump in and say very quickly, hopefully we'll have a time for a few questions before we end, just before 1. So wanted everybody to know that. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you for that. So yes, as I mentioned, I was the co-chair of the Just Transition Subcommittee and helped create the document that's driving this entire conversation today. I was then brought on as the equity consultant for the Climate Council in trying to work with each of the subcommittees in utilizing the tools and the Just Transitions principles, as well as creating an environment for equity that honors equity and diversity within their deliberations itself. So, supporting equity in this workspace. And please let me know if there's little weird Zoom boxes or something that are taking up space on your windows. Let me know if there's things you can't see. So we are going to use the Zoom features for hand raising whenever is possible, if you can. Again, limit use of the chat to support an inclusive dialogue for those that may be taking notes, or if there's, for any reason, folks that might be joining by phone. We do want to be mindful of our use of jargon and acronyms as we start to talk about things, just so, again, this is one more tool for the public to understand this work and for our colleagues to understand this work. We want to keep track of our participation, just again, as I know some of you and not all of you, if you do have a question, just letting us know, hey, this is I'm just trying to ask some questions, if you can kind of do a little bit of sharing within that space. And then we want to manage our expectations that we're not going to answer all of our questions or complete all of our work today. So what this work actually is. So this is an opportunity to review and strengthen the recommendations that we have to better address equity in design and implementation. So in some cases, you may have seen that the recommendations came forth were very specific with regards to the pathways forward to achieve the goals of the Climate Action Plan, whereas there's others that may speak more broadly and require greater interrogation and collaboration in design. So recognizing that this is the chance for us to breathe through it and find other ways to think about it and be innovative in that effort. We see this as an important mirror to state what these recommendations will and will not do with specificity regarding the lived experiences of those in Vermont. And I'm using this slide again, recognizing this was part of the speech. This is the preamble that I gave to folks going into the Climate Action Plan deliberations and the design. The Climate Action Plan is a living document and it will be updated. And that's why folks are still on board with remaining with this work. So I don't see this as having had an endpoint yet. We also see this as an opportunity to create a pathway towards transparency on decision-making processes. If a community should not see itself reflected in this work, why was that decision made? Was it made because it was inconvenient? Was it made because the funding's not there? Was it made because perhaps data is missing that we might want to have to inform that work? The public needs to understand that in order to buy into this at all. This is an encouragement for a deeper collaboration between state government and the private sector. As you can see, there is no way possible that the members of the Climate Council, nor the legislature, or even state government has the full capacity to do this work in and of itself. It's going to require all hands on deck, folks from other states, national organizations, all of the colleges and universities we freaking have in Vermont to help us be able to get this going and get what we need to do it with true fidelity. This also is a means for listening and reflecting on public hopes, dreams, and demands regarding our climate crisis. This gives us a chance to say, who are we not hearing from, or what are the questions we haven't asked ourselves yet? Now, what this work is not, it's not a partisan initiative. This is the fight for our lives and our planet. This is also not a panacea. It's definitely not complete. It cannot be siloed, nor is it perfect. So when you're looking at the guiding principles in the scoring rubric, just so you'll understand how they work together. So the guiding principles, they set the framework to better ensure that the recommendations are not just comprehensive, but that they are also inclusive. So there's going to be, when you think about it, the things that come through both the guiding principles questions that we're asking and the scoring rubric itself, these are the questions that the public's going to want answered in order to be able to support your recommendations. So use the questions also to help identify what more do you need to feel confident in the decisions you're making. And it gives you a chance to set your intentions for state government and for other members of the legislature in further development and implementation of equity through those recommendations, right? So the just transition key terms, I think, that are important to sort of just identify. There were 4 areas that this work was really trying to center on. And as we think about scoring them, as we think about evaluating them, we'll want to hold these close. So distributive equity. Distributive equity starts by recognizing disparities in the allocation of resources, in health outcomes, the inequities in living conditions, and lack of political power that place what we call either frontline or impacted communities at much greater risk. Okay, so distributive equity strategies, they're looking at targeting resources to adaptation and mitigation that affect the communities and the populations most impacted. How do we redistribute, right? Procedural equity, and this is one of the places that we've struggled with the most. It's one of the things that the EJ bill is trying to attempt. It's one of the things you're going to hear in letters and you're hearing in complaints and you may see in the forms of protest, typically has to do with procedural justice and equity, right? So procedural equity is often referred to as equitable planning and implementation. So equitable planning and implementation require that communities have a means to meaningfully participate, not just see a flyer on a wall and if I'm available and I got childcare, I can make it there. But what are the multitude of ways that I can have my voice heard within this process and help you design the solutions that are going to directly impact my life, right? So policymakers have to collaborate with communities directly to learn about their perspectives so that the solutions actually do meet the community needs. It is not a benevolent decision. It is not a parachute down. It is a peer-to-peer, let's get in on this together. So equitable planning, that part focuses on the local level. And it ensures that local communities have that opportunity to provide input again on those policies that directly affect them. So we're going from way up top to bringing it down to the personal level. How does that community, how does that senior living in a mobile home in Milton see themselves in this work? Contextual. So contextual equity, it ensures that the mitigation and adaptation strategies, that they take into account that low-income communities, Black communities, Indigenous communities, and people of color, people with disabilities, amongst others, are often more vulnerable to climate change. We're placing this within the context of how it actually feels and impacts our lives, right? So contextual equity ensures that the development of those strategies at statewide and local levels are going to take these disparities into account. And then finally, we're looking at corrective equity. So corrective equity, it ensures that the mitigation and adaptation strategies, they provide communities with clear processes to hold the state accountable to its commitments to pursue equity. Each of these were considered in the principles. Each of these are considered in the evaluative model. So who is this impacting, right? So when we're thinking about our impacted and frontline communities, as the global warming we are dealing with accelerates, the council and its subcommittees must engage with those on the front lines of the climate crisis. This was not able to occur. Studies continue to show that low-income communities, Indigenous people, Black and other communities of color, and those are among those who are most particularly vulnerable to those impacts, right? And in addition, as industry and jobs transition away from greenhouse gas emissions and towards greener jobs and livelihoods, particular focus must be given to the labor sector and support for organized labor. True, just transitions rarely ever happen. Finally, some Vermonters may also necessarily be focused on achieving immediate goals around food, shelter, safety, and health, which all can impact their ability to focus on participation in our long-term adaptation to climate and economic changes. So recognizing that all of these things are coming to bear in how we will do in this next phase, right? So the guiding questions and rubrics. Well, actually, let me pause if anyone has a quick question they would like to share, or otherwise we can at the end. I'm happy either way. And I know I asked for hand raising and I can't see. So
and I can't see either. Let's keep going. And this is not a shy group. So if somebody needs a point of clarification, they can reach out.
Okay, perfect. All right, let me just get my mouse to work. There we go. Okay, so the guiding questions and rubric. So what we want to do is we're going to let the questions guide our thinking around the total impacts and potential as a critical function of building out recommendations and policies, right? So we want to use the rubric to help refine and identify areas of strength and of the challenges. So the way the rubric is designed is that it allows for a score of 1 low and 3 high for each of the criteria. So we're saying the proposal meets the criteria to some degree, but it provides limited explanation or there's significant opportunities to enhance this criteria in the proposal, right? Moderate is that it meets the criteria of what we're thinking, but there's more opportunities to enhance this criteria to better meet the goals of the guiding principles. And 3, the proposal excels in meeting the criteria. Now, it may not meet every single spot. Not everything is going to get a 3 and not everything is going to get a 1, but it gives you a constant gut check of where we're going to need to think about this work. And it's going to require, again, that we're honest about what we can or can't do. So what this also will provide is an opportunity to go through and think about what else is needed. So perhaps you couldn't get into it, as you saw within the CAP. Many committees spoke to that. The Just Transitions subcommittee and their write-up within the report spoke to this. That it's an overwhelming challenge for people to have done this equity assessment in the time frame that was given, with the lack of resources that they had and inability to really take into space and time imagining a different future. This does mean, I'm going to stop sharing just so you can see me again. This does mean as well that having been unable to do that many members are frustrated, and it was a heartbreak for most because they could see the value in getting into that level of work. That's how they want to come. They want to get that A+ all the time, and they just simply were not able to do it for a number of reasons. So there is a desire to come with that level of quality, but there was not a distinct, clear, and robust pathway for those to reach it. So if I was to say something as you're thinking through these policies, it was recommended, this was one of my recommendations back to the Climate Council, is again, thinking through your effective dates on different components of the bill or deadlines that are written within the bill to allow for more space and time for pieces that need that co-creation and that community engagement, but still allow the work to move forward. So to be really as innovative as we can. I see your hand. Thank you so much, Rebecca. Thank you so much, Representative White. I see you. So one more thing that I think is important. If we were to say we wanted to try to do this work and we wanted to make it have meaning, it's also going to require that significant investment for folks to be able to come through and participate in this process. So I'll have other thoughts. I'm sorry, I'm still recovering from COVID, so I have a little bit of COVID brain, but I'm sure it'll come back to me in a few minutes, but thank you. So I did see Representative White's hand up.
Yeah, let's turn to you, Representative White.
Thank you. And can you hear me? Is my sound coming in? Okay.
Yeah.
Well, Kaya, first of all, thank you so much for this presentation. And you were starting to actually answer the question that I was hoping to ask right there at the end. Representative Colburn had actually pointed it out in a conversation earlier, which is the need to rebuild trust out of this process. And especially with the groups that are most asked of while creating this set of policy recommendations. I'm wondering if you have suggestions on how we can do that rebuilding of trust. Is there a role for the legislature to play in that? But you did, as at the end there, you were, I think the time, having more time was one specific thing you said.
Thank you for that. So I think, yeah, that time is one piece, but right now, the only way you're going to rebuild that trust is through community engagement. It has to go down to the local level of community engagement. People don't believe in the work because they can't see it. They don't see how it fits into their everyday lives. They may have come to the exact same conclusions on some of the decisions and recommendations that went forth, but they really weren't given an opportunity to do so. One of the biggest challenges I felt was even within the community engagement that took place, both the in-person events and without. I mean, and that was really, really rough. I mean, even looking at the number of BIPOC, the entire process that were involved in the, like that's not even, you wouldn't even count that as statistically significant in a high school, let alone the state of Vermont. It was, couple dozen tops. That's not good. Right? But there were letters that were sent. There was input that came into through the website portals. There were folks that would tune in and would speak at the different meetings. All of that needs a really complex assessment. Somebody needs to tease all of that information out and pull it together in a really, truly comprehensive way, which is not something that I think Climate Access and RISE were able to do. And again, that's where you seriously ask a college class to help you go through all of that work, because those voices then got lost. And again, like I said, there were some of the community engagement events that took place. Even the counselors themselves were like, there were some really good ideas that I hadn't even thought about that people came with. Okay, where are those ideas now? And how do those people know that you actually heard them and then did something with it? There was no feedback loop for them to be able to understand how their words didn't just disappear again. Or it wasn't just one more time where the state asks for advice, or they ask for input, or they ask for ideas, and then it just goes into a file somewhere and has never actually been met again. So I think I was made co-host. Thank you. So I think I just let Representative Copeland in. So I think that's really that's going to be at the heart of this, of rebuilding that trust. I think that the Climate Councils tried to address the fact that there was the distrust because of the harms that happened within the deliberative space that were pretty bad. They were pretty bad. And admitting that, I think, is going to be important. If I may, just real quick, Senator Perch, I'm going to take a teeny bit of a soapbox real fast. I think one of the places that we missed as a distinct opportunity to show that we were going to be not only trying to do this differently, but to have done it differently, would have been to have honored the wisdom and the expertise of Leslie Ann Dupuy, who was the state climatologist, just saying it's in her job title. And she was not considered to be leadership in this, was dismissed and silenced. She should have led the whole thing. She should have led the writing of the climate plan, because she's the climatologist and works with the UN internationally, but Vermont was like, nah. So here was an opportunity to lift up their work. I'm an incredibly bright, brilliant, deep expertise from a Black woman, and Vermont said, no, thank you. We want to hear from the white guys in the corner. So that I just need to name that was seen and felt by everyone else who came in, that's carrying their identities with them. And it set a tone of all right, then I guess I'm just not worth crap either. So I just have to state that. So if there are names and voices that you want to hear from, that's one that should be at the top of your list. Just my little soapbox. Okay, I'll step away from that now. Senator Perchlik. Thank you.
Thanks for that. That's an important message to hear for sure. And thank you for your presentation and your work on this. And this is similar to problems we have as you know, with public engagement with transportation projects or anything the state does. And I don't know if have we ever gotten it right? Or has any other state gotten it right? Is there any process that you could point to that would be helpful? Because I think a lot of people see this, they agree with it, and they say, like, we have to do this. But then when they start thinking, well, how are we going to do it? A little frozen. And so I didn't know if there was any time that we got it right, or is this our opportunity the first time to try to get it right?
Thank you for that. So I would say that this is our time to get it right on a statewide level. We've had some great local examples, smaller scale examples that have worked very well. I feel fortunate to have been a part of one of those processes, down working in partnership between the local coalitions, the Department of Health, and the regional planning commissions that took a lot of their work to the next level. That, beyond just like, we put up a public notice that we're having a meeting, like, that's not useful, but doing really deep grassroots organizing on an almost individual basis in a number of different spaces to, do you need me to let Molly in? Oh, you got it. To really bring in people in those spaces in a very different way. Now, right now, DEC and VTrans are both engaged in a pretty robust process right now that Rights and Democracy is actually in partnership with others regarding community engagement. So we're building off of the work of our own experience in doing community engagement, and that of the Rejoice Project and the Center for Whole Communities, the Vermont Law School, and the University of Vermont at the Gund Institute to create some different processes for community engagement. They're not going to be statewide because we're not funded in a way that can provide for that level of expansion. And we still also are in a testing phase of sorts in needing to really get it right to see the scalability of what we're seeking to do. So what I will say to that is that state government's already trying to find a better way to do it. And I think that that's going to be part of this work. So you'll start to see more collaboration across departments, and whatever's going to happen with the work that we're doing around community engagement with DEC and VTrans at this point. So the other thing that I've been stating as well is so many of the different policies you have may create an entity, a advisory commission or board or something like that. And a piece that I think we need to change in the state is the roles that those folks play, not just trying to give them actual authority to do anything, because the public believes that they do, right? Even if they don't, they believe that they actually have the power to do things if they know that they exist. And that is a really key piece, is that those folks are also your liaisons back to the communities that they represent. And so we need to be lifting up and honoring their labor in a way that me living in Cabot, I can be like, oh, wait, there's that person on that board who's working on that particular initiative. I can call them. I can email them and tell them my thoughts or my questions, or at least know that because I've contacted them, it's going to make its way back to the board. This is how we start to build a much more responsive government. And I think we've been like just harming ourselves and not utilizing that huge amount of people power that we actually have from all of these boards and commissions to help us connect back to different constituencies.
Kai, thank you so much. I want to make sure, because you stopped sharing your screen and then questions came up, but you did complete your presentation, right? I want to make sure of that.
Yes. I didn't want to move forward with kind of going through the document if everyone hasn't had a chance to look at it yet. So in other situations, we usually have it in front, and I can kind of guide you through piece by piece as you're looking at it. But I'm happy to do so if you want to do that with this time, or if you'd rather, if folks already have questions, I'm happy to.
Yeah, I think we'll turn to questions. And just on the document, though, I haven't seen it, so it could be
put
that.
it in chat at the start of the meeting. That's the guiding principles for a just transition. Is that the document you mean, Kaya? Yeah, I put it in the chat at the start of the meeting. I'm sorry for the confusion for folks, but you should be able to pull that up through that link.
Okay, and yeah, if you could repost that, Selena, so we all have it. And Kaya, if you'd be willing to maybe, that's different than the PowerPoint, I'm assuming, right? Yeah. So if you wouldn't mind sending one of us the PowerPoint, we'll make sure that gets, there's only a fraction of our group is able to join us for this meeting, but I know this is something we're all really interested in. Before I turn to Representative Yantachka, I just want to say, and I think this is what both you and Senator Perchik were saying, I've been encouraged. I take to heart absolutely the weaknesses that you're outlining, and I think it's more than a fair critique as we bumble along. But one of the things that excites me about this is maybe because of the sort of innovative level of the climate battle. I mean, there's not a lot of copying we can do because everybody is scrambling. The focus on equity in this sphere is sort of more normalized, even as we have a ton of work to do. But as Senator Perchik was kind of highlighting, it now we're starting to understand, well, there's no policy that we should be advancing without this sphere. So in that way, I find little moments of optimism, and it trickles down all the way to all of the hundreds of advisory boards that the state has, and many of them no pay. At best, most people get $50 a day, which means it's totally unrealistic for a great majority of Vermonters, not the least of which is historically disadvantaged communities. So there are moments as we collectively learn here, and not to overlook our failing, but to say, hopefully this means the orientation is shifting in a positive direction. So I'm sure there are many more questions for Kaya. Representative Yantachka, you are up first.
Okay, thanks, Kaya, for your presentation. It's really disconcerting to hear that Dr. DePini-Giroux was not given more opportunity to have input to the climate action plan. But as you know, all of us are working in our various committees on different pieces of the climate action plan, and I'm wondering, I think it would be a good idea for us to invite Dr. DePini-Giroux to attend one of our climate solutions caucus meetings and give us an idea of what she would have, what she would have presented if she had the opportunity. Where the climate action plan may differ from what she thinks should be done and that sort of thing.
Yep, thank you. It's a great suggestion. Representative Kornheiser.
Thanks. Kaya, I think earlier on in your presentation, you were talking about how, at various times we've had various lenses or strategies available to us to think more deeply about our legislation. And I think you bring like a really special and valuable cross-sector knowledge, having been here in the legislature and seen our process or lack thereof on certain things. And so I'm curious to hear from you, like actually using this document, how do you like very functionally conceive that we can use it well? Would it be a whole committee go through it? Would you like recommend that people sort of peel off and before a bill comes into committee, go through it? Should something that people would do with legislative counsel? If you say all of the above, I will totally think you're right and be a little bit sad. So
well, I think you're hitting on something important. It's just kind of you can't do it. You need other people. And this was hard as we were building out the climate action plan, because I'm like, look, some group, some organization, somebody somewhere said, do this. Okay, find those people and say, take this plan, come back with this assessment, and then we'll go through it together. Like literally, like it has to be all hands on deck. Who is most vested in interested in getting this thing across the finish line? Those have to be the ones contributing to it. So they need to throw up their bat signal and be like, I need all my other coalition partners across the country. Anybody got any information about this? Like local groups that might have data that the state hasn't yet assessed, it's impossible for y'all to do this. So I guess that's what I would say, is that that these are coming from the Climate Council, which is limited in its scope, but there are folks who want to be in on this fight. And so if we were to say, I mean, it's hard to say now in the midst of the legislative process, everybody freeze and go do this assessment, but it has to happen in tandem. So, it's as much as possible, or certain components don't go effective or active until it is done. Right? There are certain pieces that if you can get us this assessment, then we will give you that allocated funds. We will kickstart this part of the proposal, but we shouldn't move forward with pieces of this until it is done. That is the way to kind of sort of compel that. So that's kind of what I'm thinking. I mean, I don't see how it's, and I hate to say our universities, because that should have been the ask like in September. So they could have started on that this semester.
Yeah.
Like, they would have been happy to. They would have been happy to have helped support this. But yeah.
And I'm actually working with a group at Dartmouth that's like sort of doing that for some of this, but I hear you. I guess I get worried then that the only things that will have sort of the power to move forward are policies that have some lobbyist energy behind them to do that legwork. But maybe this is a real opportunity to build exactly the kind of coalitions and community networks that you're talking about. So thanks.
All right, Representative Austin, I muted you at one point, so unmute.
Okay.
And hi.
Hi, Kaya. Thank you so much for this presentation. I'm just curious, during this process, when people give a 1, 2, or a 3 to something, do they have the opportunity to explain their rationale for why they gave that number? Because when I've been involved in other instances, and I've learned a lot when I've been able to hear the thinking of other people as to why they scored something the way they did.
Here, I can give you the quickest sneak peek of, so again, the climate action plan was unable to, I don't think there was, in my opinion, there was no group that was able to do the equity assessment to full fidelity. None of them. Nobody. I don't buy it. I will dispute it. Okay. But that being said, we did try to go through the process of beginning to think through what are you still going to need to do this assessment fully. So I can show you what came out of the work that we did with the folks that were working on the payment for ecosystems proposals, just so that you can see that. That's just one I pulled up as an example, just to see how we go through that. And you can see their answers that happened in a really, again, it was like a 90-minute format. They knew they had homework beyond me just being in that space with them. So I could show you briefly just so that you'll get a sense of that, and it might help with remaining questions as well. So this was the discussion that we had. So for example, again, we asked them to come up with their example of what a payment for ecosystems program might look like. Right. So they gave the definitions, as you can see here above. They gave examples like expanding the flood hazard and river corridor work to incorporate statewide jurisdiction and permitting for river corridors. So then after they went through that part of the definition, get my thingy to work. So then we wanted to ask these questions. Which frontline and impacted communities might be most impacted by this recommendation? Right. So can you actually say who's actually going to need to is this impacting? And often it was challenging for those folks in the room to really think deeply about who's most impacted. There were very generic answers that were given. How do these communities experience inequality today around these issues? So we're asking each of these guiding questions. So this is a chance for them to start to think it through. Okay. And so we go through looking at the burdens and benefits, and I apologize for the fast roll. I am looking at our time. Ensuring equitable and just engagement, thinking about funding and data, implementation and outcomes. And so now that we've done this sort of narrative work, this is where we get into the scoring rubric. So again, the 1, 2, and 3, we did not do a 0 because there should be nothing coming forward that's at a 0. But it might be 0 in an area in our minds, but it might cuspy to a 1, and you need to move it in the positive direction. So you're taking those answers, and again, I'm trying to think through. So I apologize for the scrolling, but we'll get there. So you can see here it says frontline and impacted communities. So were we well defined? Were those frontline and impacted communities well defined in the proposal? And so you can say here in the comment, we're not sure. We haven't really thought about it yet, or this is all we could identify at this point in time. We want to ask more generally, and there might be more answers. So we're going to give ourselves a 1 or 2 right now because we're not completely there. The proposal reflects an understanding of the existing inequities. Again, just being real. We're giving it this rank. That is not a forever rank. Our goal is to make it better. This is why we may or may not have much in the way of answers here, right? And so then going through again and for each of the different areas. So it does give a chance for people to explain it again, just being transparent with the public, right? And then also saying for ourselves, this is where we need to improve. Or if we're not going to improve, this is why we can't improve.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Kaya, for being with us. Oh, Selena's got her hand up. Go ahead, Rip Colburn.
Well, I was just going to say, I think one of the things you shared with our smaller group too, Kaya, that I found really compelling is that it may be not always just a tool for assessing an individual policy, but for understanding, is there a concurrent policy that needs to move forward on a parallel track to like make this equitable, right? You know, so yeah, I just thought that was a really valuable way to think about things.
Thank you so much, Kaya, for your great work in developing this screening tool and for your willingness to share it with us as Climate Solutions Caucus members. And so for caucus members who are here in the meeting today, you know, our goal needs to be to understand the screening tool and how to use it so that we can then begin to vet policies within our committees. You know, we are part of the climate action plan in that the legislature is required to pass legislation to adopt many of the recommendations of the plan. And so we need to see this as an important part of the vetting process that we do within the legislative context. But Kaya, I also wanted to let you know that our goal is to record today's session so that we can make sure that we share it with the rest of our Climate Solutions Caucus folks who are sitting in other policy committees and perhaps, you know, were busy during lunchtime and couldn't join us today. And Representative Kornheiser has her hand up, and then we'll sign off.
Thanks. I just wanted to add that I think the next step for us is really to practice using this so we can really understand it. And so Selena and I and the rest of the Just Transition working group will figure out a great way to sort of take the caucus through that practicing.
Excellent. And, you know, we can think of a few top tier committees right off the top of our head who we want to make sure are comfortable and familiar with it and able to use it. So
and if I may,
volunteering to. Yes, ma'am.
One last piece I think is also important when we're thinking about the rubric does ask, it has a scoring piece at the end as well, not scoring, a checklist. Like, were you able to see how this plan will actually help, and not just in a generic way, but in a somewhat specific way, be able to help support different impacted groups? And a great example I got was around, I think it was weatherization. How is weatherization going to improve the lives of youth coming out of foster care? Right. And so as well, those populations came out of thinking about the National Green New Deal conversations and how they're defining impacted communities. But I'm like, that is actually an area where you can. How about workforce development of supporting programs for youth coming out, you know, to help them be able to skill up and learn how to do weatherization work in their communities as their own small businesses or whatever else. So sometimes you may not have the answer, and you may need to go to those communities and say, well, what is there anything in here that we feel like we could make sure that you're being represented in this work in a really meaningful way? So just saying that it's okay if you don't have all the answers, but they probably do exist. And sometimes that innovation comes from within those groups.
And I love the way the tool, as you've described it, can really help us to stop and think, well, who do I know in my community that I can go and ask for more information from in order to enrich the work that we're doing and make sure that it's working for them. So that's important and super helpful. So Senator Pearson, do you want to send us off with a high five and a flourish?
Yeah. A virtual high five. Kaya, it's so great to see you. And thank you for all this work and everybody for joining us today. And we will share this, the link to the live stream around so that folks, we have a much bigger membership than we're able to participate today. We're still struggling with that virtually, but just much gratitude and look forward to engaging on this important work moving forward.